Hey everybody, thank you for watching another episode of the Trampionship Wrestling Weekend Show. We're going to get into it real quick today. Not a whole lot of news. James Ellsworth was just released from his WWE contract. This was a big surprise because he's been a big part of Carmella's story. And with Carmella still having that Money in the Bank briefcase, it seems like weird timing to cut him loose. But everybody that's setting things has been very supportive of him. There's no stories about backstage heat. I gotta think that they just didn't know where they were going with his whole he's Carmella's sex pet story, and they just wanted to cut ties because they weren't using him as a wrestler anymore. He had that one match against Becky Lynch and it just wasn't going to go anywhere. So maybe they just thought it was better to cut their losses. He got to live for over a year on WWE contract. That's something that a lot of people dream of their whole lives. I was very skeptical when they signed him, when they first brought him back, but he did a really good job, and I'm sad to see him go. Also on SmackDown, we saw Charlotte win the Women's Championship from Thalia. From what I understand, she honestly did not know that Ric Flair was there backstage waiting for her after the victory. That was an honest moment afterwards when his music hit and he surprised her. I know that there were some backstage reports before the show that he was there, but apparently she did not see them and they kept them separate. So from what I understand, that was an honest moment. Either that or she's working people very close to her. This weekend we were going to have a show actually tonight for Wrestle Circus. They were going to do Rise of the Machine. It was canceled this week. We don't know exactly why. We were told it was for personal reasons and that they would hope everybody would respect their privacy. So there's been some speculation as to what it is, but nobody seems to be digging too deep. Nobody is really tweeting anything too nasty about it. Some of the talent seem to have found out on Twitter, which isn't great, but everybody seems to just be trying to fill their booking, but nobody is really going off on them the way they have when like BCW or Canuck Pro shows just disappeared. You know, this time most of the talent was actually notified. I think the people that found out from Twitter just did it because they checked Twitter before they got to voicemails or email or however they were notified. It's not that they weren't notified, it's that they didn't check how they would have been notified. So we do have confirmation. Laurel Van Ness / Chelsea Green did say that they will be back for the December show. She had already been booked for it, so I'm assuming that she was told when they canceled this show that they were doing the next. But this was going to be a big show, and now it just isn't a show. We wish for the best for the Wrestle Circus family. I know that there have been health issues in the past with Al Lenhart. I'm hoping that that's not the situation here. I'm hoping that it's nothing too serious, but on the other end, I can't imagine them canceling a show the week of without it being something pretty big. So we're hoping whatever it is gets resolved as quickly and as well as it can. There is a big ICW show, Fear and Loathing, this weekend, but I don't feel like I can speak on ICW quite as well as some other people out there, so we're just going to check that out if you are into the British wrestling. I'm still working on getting a little bit more involved in it. I know that there's a Kenny Williams versus Rey Mysterio match that is very, very heavily hyped, and I just don't know enough about Kenny Williams to really get into that match. So to those of you that means something to, check out that show. It's going to be huge. But for most of us here stateside, I think the two biggest shows this weekend are going to be the WWE shows. We've got TakeOver, Wargames. We've got Cassius Ono versus Large Sullivan. It's going to start that off. It's going to be interesting to see where they go because Cassius does not seem like the kind of guy that you would feed to your big monster, basically Braun Strowman-esque heel. They were pushing Lars as kind of Lenny from Mice and Men kind of character, but now they're kind of taking him a little bit more sinister. how much offense Cassius gets in is going to be very telling of his spot in the company. They were pushing him as a title contender just a few months ago, and now he's basically the first expendable serious guy for Large Sullivan. So that's, if he's able to pull off a win, that's huge for him, but more than likely he's going to lose. If he's able to look good in the loss, then it means they haven't given up on him. Then we've got Alistair Black versus Velveteen Dream. This is going to be very telling for Patrick Clark. He'd been bouncing around NXT for a while before they finally settled on the Velveteen Dream gimmick. Seems to be doing very well, but they are obviously very high on Alistair Black with how much money they've invested into his entrance. He's got a very great look. That fade to black kick is just a killer. A one-hit knockout is a great finish, but you don't give it to just anybody, because once it fails, it doesn't work again. So they're going to have to either not let him hit it, or he's got to win. I think that Alistair Black has a higher ceiling in the company than Velveteen Dream, but I think in NXT they're trying to put them basically as equals, so I see Alistair winning, but I'm not very confident in that. It could go either way. You got the women's four-way. That is Kairi Sane versus Peyton Royce versus Ember Moon versus Nikki Cross. I think a lot of people are expecting Sane to win because she's just coming off the Mae Young Classic. I tend to think that Ember Moon is more likely. She seemed to be poised to be the next champion before Asuka's injury. She is, in my opinion, the best talent on the women's roster in NXT. But Nikki Cross has a lot of charisma that a lot of others don't, so she's in there too. And the iconic duo has been great. We could see a Lay Cool situation if Peyton wins. That's my way of saying that it could go any way. There's reason for any of these four women to win, but I think that when they pull the trigger, it is going to be going on to Ember Moon. NXT Championship, you got Drew McIntyre versus Andrade Almas. They seem to be getting very serious about Almas. They've been building up this push for a few months now, and Drew McIntyre just hasn't really felt that important, especially with Wargames not involving him, and the focus going on to the whole Roderick Strong, Adam Cole, Sanity, Undisputed Era situation. It doesn't bode well for Drew McIntyre. I would not expect to see McIntyre in the main event when they put him back to the main roster. He will probably be floating around the mid-card for a while, but I think this is probably Andrade his best chance at winning. If he doesn't win this Sunday, don't expect him to hold a title in NXT at all. This is going to be when they pull the trigger, if they pull the trigger. And then with Wargames, Wargames doesn't have a ceiling or a roof, whatever you want to call it. Don't know how we found that out, but everybody was furious. I'm not furious, but I'm definitely curious why they would do that. It just seems weird to not go with the classic Wargames after they've already changed so much. Not at least keep that, especially with how reverent towards Wargames and the American Dream Triple H seems to be. To just take these things and change them so much is very weird. I would expect to see Undisputed Era come out on top. Sanity is going to look strong no matter what. They've been working as a team. They've got the tag belts. They can survive this just fine. Undisputed Era is getting teased as the big thing, and Roderick Strong can easily look good in a loss if he just gets overpowered by all three members. If they're able to take out Akam and Razor, which with two teams working against them, that's very likely. I would expect Undisputed Era to get the win, somehow screwing over Roderick Strong. Then on to the big show the next night, Survivor Series. This is a huge card. It will be interesting to see just how much the layout changes overnight. Do they deconstruct the second ring when it's going to be a lot of work to not just do that, but also rearrange all the seating, everything? That's a lot of... Obviously they can do it because they do even more than that whenever they go from town to town, but it's a little bit different when you've already got it set up and then you're changing the setup overnight. Do they take down the second ring, or do they leave it up for something special they haven't announced? There's about a 10% chance in my mind they leave that second ring up. But we do have a lot of big matches. The only single brand match on there, the Cruiserweight Championship, Enzo is defending against Kalisto. I don't know why they gave the belt to Kalisto in the first place, just to take it away. I don't see him getting it back. Enzo's going to hold on to this one. Then the cross-brand matches, you got Alexa versus Charlotte. I would expect Charlotte to win. They seem to be very high on her. They definitely went a long way giving her the victory just this past week in her hometown with Ric Flair there. I don't expect her to lose this. I think she's going to look strong heading into WrestleMania. I think this is when they are going to... I would say it is very likely that she wins and then Carmella cashes in. I know I've been saying that I thought the WrestleMania story was going to be was going to be Charlotte versus Becky. There's a very good chance that they do it Charlotte versus Carmella instead, or they do Charlotte versus Carmella going through to Royal Rumble, and then Charlotte versus Becky at Mania. You got The Miz versus Baron Corbin. I think The Miz is going to win this. Baron is going to look strong no matter what. It's a heel versus heel match, which is very interesting to see how they book that. Miz has a lot more sympathy because people love his promos, even though he is such a good heel. I expect him to win because of that. It's going to give him a little bit more story leeway, especially if Raw ends up losing the big 10-man tag in the end, where he can at least say, well, I held up my end. Baron doesn't need that as much. He could get some mileage out of it, but not as much. So I'm expecting The Miz to win that one. You got the Usos versus The Bar. This is a strong contender for a match of the night. Usos have been delivering consistently, and Cesaro and Sheamus are solid workers. You put them in the ring with a pair of people like the Usos, and that match could be amazing. At the very least, it's just going to be a solid, good match. It's hard to call. I'm going to say that it's going to be the Usos, just because I think I'm leaning more towards a lot more Raw victories on the show overall. So giving this one of the Usos would help even that out a little bit. AJ Styles versus Brock Lesnar. I expect Brock to win, but I expect AJ to look like he's about to win before Jinder Mahal interferes. That'll give him a nice little feud with Shane McMahon or Daniel Bryan, depending on how Shane and Daniel's story goes after the show. But it just makes sense that Jinder would have a rematch against AJ, and him interfering and screwing over AJ gives that a little bit more storyline. It lets AJ lose without looking worse than Brock. And that's the match where you most want to save face for the loser, because both guys have to represent their brand. But I think Brock comes out with the victory, but it's going to be a tainted one because of Jinder. Then you've got the Shield versus the New Day. This one is hard to believe it hasn't happened already. Like we said when they first set it up, they have teased this match in the past, but this is the first time we're actually going to see it. I think that it's excellent that they are doing this, because we don't know how long the Shield is going to stick around. And this is one of the big 3-on-3 matches that they can deliver that actually is going to mean something. This is going to be a physical match. New Day knows how to bring it when it matters, and when you're in the ring with 3 former world champions, like the members of the Shield, it matters. And I think all 3 of them are going to be hungry to show that they are on the same level. Whereas the Shield hasn't operated as a tag team for a while. They're going to be hungry to show that they are still as good a tag team as they were when they were consistently wrestling together. So both teams have a lot to prove, and this is going to be a good, solid match. Then you've got the women's tag team match, Alicia, Nia, Sasha, Asuka, and Bayley versus Becky, Naomi, Tamina, Carmella, and possibly Natalia, but that was never actually made a sure thing. It was going to be Charlotte on that team, but now that she is in the champion versus champion match, she's off. So we're assuming Natalia is going to be in there, but they could go with a surprise. I think that Team Raw is going to win, mainly because of Asuka being on the team. I think once we see Asuka versus Tamina, if that happens, that's going to be pretty interesting. That's two dominant powerhouses, but Asuka is just getting more of a push right now, where she's going to come out on top, and I think she's going to be one of the final survivors. Then in what is likely to be the main event, you got Kurt Angle, Braun Strowman, Samoa Joe, Finn Balor, and Triple H versus Shane McMahon, Randy Orton, Bobby Roode, Shinsuke Nakamura, and John Cena. Like I said in the beginning, I think Raw is going to win this, but the main thing is there are so many different combinations of people that can square off in this one. You got Bobby Roode versus Triple H, which is just something that people have been thinking about since the day Bobby Roode signed on. I mean, both guys are so clearly influenced by Ric Flair in their style, but have similar ring styles to each other. That's going to be a little bit of a teacher-student story just because of Bobby Roode getting such a huge push in NXT. Samoa Joe versus Shinsuke Nakamura is going to be amazing. Kurt Angle versus Shinsuke Nakamura. Nakamura versus any of these Raw guys is just a show we haven't really seen much of it. Except for Joe and Finn, we got to see that a little bit in NXT. But the other three, that's going to be huge. Bobby Roode's going to get all this exposure to guys like Kurt Angle that we saw in TNA. So we know that they've got some chemistry. There are going to be some great battles in here. John Cena versus Braun Strowman could be insane. But like I said, I do expect Raw to pick up the win just because I don't think Kurt Angle is going to get storyline fired yet. And I think that the fallout is going to be a little bit more interesting for SmackDown, especially with Daniel Bryan teasing that he might be leaving, or at least is very upset with Shane. I think some finger pointing there will have a little bit more interest just because those two, GM and Commissioner, are a little bit more on the same side. They're both faces, as opposed to Raw, where you know who's going to get blamed because that's the way the story has been all the time. I think there's just a little bit more interest in SmackDown coming out as a failure. But then again, I did say with the Raw losing, The Miz could have more to say. So, ignore me. But that's where I see those matches going. Anyway, thank you for watching. I love you guys. As always, cheers.